and get down to, yeah. Go ahead, Varushka. I would suggest that. Yeah, thank you.
Namaste and greetings. I, Varushka, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav Evam Niti Anusandhan Sansthan, Nai Delhi, extend my warmest welcome to you all to IMPRI Web Policy Talks. We are gathered here today for a panel discussion on education, S&T, R&D, and the Union Budget of 2024 to 25. This deliberation is a part of IMPRI's 5th annual series of thematic deliberations and analysis of the Union Budget. It is a series of panel discussions on crucial key policy issues and the Union Budget of 2024 to 25, involving more than 100 thematic distinguished experts and research team members. This discussion is organized by the Center for ICT for Development at IMPRI and is part of IMPRI's Web Policy Talk series, The State of Education, particularly Education Dialogue. I would love to introduce our esteemed gathering. Our chair for this session is Professor Sachidanand Sinha ji, visiting professor at IMPRI and a former professor at Jawaharlal Nehru University in Delhi. We welcome you, sir. And today's deliberation comprises of an excellent distinguished panel of experts who will be sharing their expertise, including Dr. Y. Suresh Reddy, Director at the SRF Foundation, Gurgaon, Professor Binod Khadria ji, former professor at JNU, New Delhi, Professor Mona Khare ji, professor and head at the Department of Educational Finance, National Institute of Educational Planning and Administration, New Delhi, Professor Nalin Bharti ji, professor at Department of Humanities and Social Sciences at the Indian Institute of Technology, IIT Patna, and visiting senior fellow at IMPRI, Professor Saumen Chattopadhyay ji, Professor and Chairperson at Zakir Hussain Center for Educational Studies at Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, and Professor Anita Rampal ji, former Dean at Faculty of Education of the University of Delhi. We're extremely grateful to have such a distinguished panel of experts joining us today. Proceeding further, I welcome all the participants to this enlightening deliberation. Thank you for being interested in putting your time, energy, and effort into understanding the nuances of education within the union budget, while helping us bring together the practitioners and participants through this course for impact discussion, presentation, and introduction to the educational allocation of the budget.
We can't hear you.
I hope. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, we can see all. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so today we will be looking at the budgetary allocation and schemes introduced for education in the budget of 2024. To start with, the finance minister announced the PM's package for 1.48 crore rupees, which focuses on education, employment, and skilling. There are 5 schemes introduced under this PM's package. The first 3 schemes focus on employment incentives, as can be seen on the slide. The first scheme is for first-timers, the second scheme for job creation and manufacturing, and the third scheme focusing on support for employees. The fourth and fifth scheme are education-related schemes. The fourth scheme of skilling program and upgradation of industrial training institutes, under which the government is set to build about 100 IT hubs. And the fifth scheme of internship opportunities in the top 500 companies, where a monthly stipend would be provided and would be implemented in coordination with the state government initiatives wherever applicable. Another scheme announced by the finance minister is financial support for up to 10 lakh rupees in domestic institutions. Additionally, a provision for setting up working women's hostels has been announced. This is what the allocation for education of 2024 to 25. We can observe that there has been an increase in the allocation for the pre-existing schemes. The schemes are Samagra Shiksha, strengthening teaching, learning and results from the stars, PM School for Rising India, PM Shri. The RUSA scheme has now been renamed to Pradhan Mantri Uchchatar Shiksha Abhiyan, PM Usha, Post-Matric Scholarship for SCs, PM Young Achievers Scholarship Award Scheme for Vibrant India, PM Yasavi, for OBCs, EBCs, and DNTs, PM Uchchatar Shiksha Proshthan for PM USP Yojana and Eklavya Model Residential Schools, EMRS. And the budget for these schemes is on the slide. Given here are some other highlights for the budget of 2024 to 25. The grant for UGC has been slashed by 60%. From the budget of 2024, allocation for Kendra Vidyalaya Sanghatan, KVS, Navodaya Vidyalaya Samiti, NVS, National Bhavan has increased, but the allocation for the National Council of Educational Research and Training, NCERT, has decreased from 518.5 crore rupees of budget estimate in 2023 to 24 to 510 crore rupees in the budget estimate of the year 2024 to 25. With that, I would now like to hand over this session and begin this panel, starting with our chair, Professor Sachidanand Sinha ji. The floor is all yours, sir.
Thank you. I think, when we have seen the highlights of the budget and and how, over the years, how much was allotted and allocated and how much we were in a position to spend. In terms of the allocation, again, it's not very different from what was there in the interim budget a few months back. What we really see is that whatever has been allocated, we have not been in a position to spend that much. So I think, it's better if we take a general view on the budgetary allocations for 24-25, and I think, we'll move on to Professor Anita Rampal first, and then Professor Khadria. Professor Anita Rampal, your views on the budget. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. So what I'll do is that since the figures have been presented, I just take us to the point that, for us, looking at it as an election year is also important, because we think that there is some introspection, some looking at trends, looking at what kind of issues have been there and what aspirations need to be addressed. And so I'll just take a brief look at the manifestos of two parties to tell us what is it that they were looking for in terms of their mandate in education. And the BJP, unfortunately, had a very brief manifesto in education, and also seemed to be using the same neoliberal rhetoric in which it spoke of education, especially at the higher education, to be industry-aligned curriculum, skill development, and the focus on learning outcomes in terms of school, strengthening of the existing school systems, their programs, not the system. I mean, the kind of initiatives that they were taking, like the PM Shri is something which is called, the schools of excellence or exemplar schools, but it is the same Kendriya Vidyalayas, which are our best resourced government schools, the Navodaya Vidyalayas, and plus other schools. So they were asking the states to identify some schools, and some private schools they'd asked within states to be identified. So again, a renaming, the whole manifesto was only PM ki guarantee. So there was nothing that really brought in much more in terms of the voice of the country, or, the voice of what the government thinks should be done. And the problem was that the whole thrust in education was digital education. So digital education for access, digital technology for greater access, and at least, saying that we must have, and the conditionality to co-opt states into the existing programs, but funding them through PM Shri was in a way linked to their showcasing. They call it showcasing the NEP. So does the survey say, it calls it showcasing NEP, but actually it's like an arm twisting of states to be adopting NEP. And so we know that currently there were 3 states like West Bengal, Punjab, which had said that we will not really sign an MOU because it's a 60-40 sharing of funds. So the states are being forced then to fund this scheme also. And so they didn't sign, but now their SSA, Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan funds have been stopped. So, this entire thing, it questions the federalism within which education has to function. And I think that is crucial both for school education and for higher education. Whereas I briefly look at what the Indian National Congress manifesto said, and there one thing interesting was that it was linking the issues related with youth and education. So there was a call for, of course, there was a call to extend right to education. There was a call to revisit NEET and CUET, and most of these centralized examinations, centrally conducted exams. We have seen what's happening in the last 2 months, so this was crucial. There was also, and they said that revisiting NEP with state governments in the light of federalism. Employment in education, they spoke of community colleges for every block. And this is different from the way what is being now proposed. And the right to apprenticeship, we know that in the public and private sector, with people getting, the youth getting 1 lakh per year. One important thing, to restore fellowships, to restore the Maulana Azad scholarships, to double the higher education fellowships for PhD, for SC, ST, etc. Again, something that has been decreased. We can see that some fellowships have been stopped in the past, and funds for some has really gone down. And one very important thing I want to flag here, the manifesto of Congress said that to promote and to work for academic freedom in higher education institutions, to ensure that students' freedom of expression, students' unions are activated and promoted, and also teachers, to restore teachers, fill teachers' vacancies and not keep it contractual. So taking this, I want to now come to what we find in the education survey and what concerns we have. So one, of course, as we have seen, that the survey tells us that the educational expenditure by the union and state governments has dropped from, say, 10 years back at 2.9% of GDP now to 2.7%. So it's going even further down. And also it's dropped as part of the social services component from 10.7% now to 9.2%. And that we find that now what is being pushed is an increase in the involvement of non-state actors, which is a form of philanthropo-capitalism, and also specifically in terms of corporate social responsibility. Now, I want to underline this a little, because this now in a lot of global reports, in a lot of the global monitoring reports, is being touted as India as the first country to have mandated corporate social responsibility, and that 25% of the companies have set up their foundations and 50% have set up their own CSR, their own units. So this is one way in which the government is now offloading much onto the corporate sector. And I will just come to what implications this has, what problems we find it has, because one, of course, it's pushing it towards privatization, but also there are other issues that are involved in the way the learning outcomes. How do you look at these things? We have never used the word learning outcomes. Personally, I have resisted this word because of the way it looks at an input-output model, and in fact, then justifies denying inputs, because they're just only looking at outcomes. It comes through the air. When we worked in the last national curriculum framework, when the ministry asked us, we developed what we call learning indicators, which were contingent upon the process of learning. So it sort of squarely said, if this happens, and if learning happens through these processes, and if children make observations, if they do this, then by the age they reach grade 5, they will be expected to have learned things like that. So it was never meant to be not tied or de-linked with the way the process happens. But this is now the whole model now, the way it's being looked at, including the budget, is now focusing on learning outcomes. So the rhetoric of the education economic survey is also, it talks about, the 3C model for the aspirational district program. And the 3C is convergence across the levels of government, collaboration of civil society. Now, civil society and volunteer and community participation is coming in like it was there in NEP, and competition. So there's competition between states and districts. This is what it claims. And they claim that they can ensure this through a dashboard monitoring of monthly progress. Now, just like they're doing it for a district or a state, the same thing comes down to a child, and the policy has been now they're implementing children's national assessment at grade 3, grade 5, and grade 8, and detention. Many states now, like Delhi state, had jumped into it much earlier, that they will detain children at grade 3 also. So this completely abandons, throws out, and violates the right to education of a child, which is a constitutional right. And then, so they are talking of this as a transformational, transformed approach to welfare, when you bring in a lot of the private sector and you bring in the corporate sector. And we should remember that, so the language changes. So in what they now propose is, there are 613 district institutes of educational training at the district. Now they say they'll upgrade them to diets of excellence. So the word excellence gets appended with everything, as if equity has been forgotten, and now your thrust is efficiency and excellence. So I'm just saying that we are wary of the way the discourse changes. And so the NCF, how much time do I have? 2 minutes?
Yeah, another 2 minutes. Yeah.
So the thrust now is on vocational education. And so much so that it's shocking that they've now been using in the NCF document and the economic survey that the thrust is going to be on pre-vocational capacities in grade 3 in primary school. Now, we've never heard these words. The push for vocational education and the legitimization that they're trying to get, they're using all kinds of questionable and even outdated notions. In the NCF, they talk of, they say that children's concepts developed only after age 11 or 12. This is completely false. So they use some outdated 1968 document to refer to it. Now they call it that when children go and talk to shopkeepers, they're developing pre-vocational capacities. This is something that completely has to be, we cannot accept it. We cannot say that anyone who's working with hands, if they're growing, they say if they're doing gardening, they're developing pre-vocational. So this whole thing, which in Gandhi's Nai Talim, vocation was not talked of, we talked of work. And we always talk of work-based education for everyone. That is the humanist paradigm. But the neoliberal paradigm now wants to push vocation right from early childhood, when you can segregate children, obviously the poor, obviously the disadvantaged, and based on caste. So you can do all these segregations and just, say that you've developed vocational capacities. So this is, and now they're saying that their main thing, and this is what we need to look at more sort of critically, the digital push in education, because their budget said they're pushing in for digital greater access, but also they're calling this, there are two things. They're saying APAR. Of course, these are famous ways of concocting acronyms. So automated permanent academic account registry. Now, this is questionable. We are already dealing and contending with the way data is being collected of children, of students, given to third party without privacy concerns, children and teachers. And we've been contesting this even in courts where possible. But now they're calling this APAR registry, and they're saying it'll be supplemented by the academic bank of credit, transfers. So they mean that right from the young child to lifelong, they're calling it lifelong learning. So they're calling it a trajectory of your credits, your credentials, academic credentials being recorded. But before they brought the national credit framework, just before they brought it in, a few days, in fact, maybe 2-3 days before that, they pushed in for a lot of IKS, Indian knowledge systems. again, very questionable the way it's being defined. We work in indigenous knowledge systems, but Indian knowledge systems is another, canvas which we have contested. But they brought in many colors and many different things. Everything can get a credit for a child in school if a child has done some course, and the course can be online, the course can be in any way. So, this whole thing is now, just like in the gig economy, is sort of totally ad hoc and totally is bringing in contractual appointments, employment. Similarly, education then can become, because the national curriculum framework will give 11th and 12th courses which we've never had such courses, which don't have academic components, but can only be vocational and can only be Indian knowledge system. So schools can run courses like that. So many students can get their 12th board through this, and then all their credits can take them further. And we know that our universities are appointing professors of practice who don't need to have academic credentials at all. So, this then is a very serious area that we need to look at. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Rampal. We now move on to Binod Khadria, and thanks, Anitaji, for presenting a very comprehensive perspective on how to look at the current budgetary allocation. But we can't really afford to see this in isolation. I think, Professor Khadria would further add on to.
Thank you, Professor Sinha. And thanks to the organizers and, of course, Anita Rampal for making that presentation. I would like to begin by addressing the budget itself in terms of Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman's. This is her 7th budget in a row, and so that has a significance. But this year, I was looking for what would be unique, because this is from a coalition government, whereas the earlier ones were from a government which had the absolute majority. I would have expected that the finance minister would have in this budget something that would reflect her experience of 7 budgets in terms of failures as well as successes. And I would say it was not obviously visible. If it was hidden, or it was underlying the policies or likely to come up later on, then that's a different matter. Our turf today is 3-pronged, let us say. It's called education, science and technology, and R&D in the context of the budget. But I tend to think that education itself is generic enough to imbibe S&T and R&D issues also, because we do have, in the case of education, we have higher education, and then we have primary and secondary education. Primary education is a different ballgame. It's a fundamental right. Universal primary education is a fundamental right. So there is no issue on targeting, because everybody must get that education. When it comes to secondary education, we need to have preparations for the higher education, because they are the inputs going into higher education. The school graduates are the entrants at the higher education level, which is, so we would say from 18 to 24 age group population is extremely important. Science and technology. First of all, you see, when we look at, I would say, human capital formation or human capital utilization, then there are 2 parts. The human capital formation is the education part, and of course, at the end of education, the employment is the utilization part. We cannot lose sight of one of the 2 when we are planning whether it is education or whether it is employment. That is where we have the whole gamut of formal education system and the vocational skill education system. right up to the higher education and doctoral and postdoctoral issues, and then professional education of doctors, of engineers, and so on. In S&T, the terminology that is being used is no longer S&T. It is used STEM professionals, STEM education, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And science here includes social science as well. We have to keep that in mind. When we think of R&D, then that's also another very big canvas, and a part of that is within the education sector. And because when the graduates go into doctoral and postdoctoral level, then that is all R&D. And in science, much more. In medicine, even more. Post-COVID-19, we find that vaccine research is very, very important. And so we don't have time to go into the details of that. Just having mentioned that, I would tend to say that these are all connected to the average productivity of labor. What is the average productivity of labor is all the entire population's working age group, and then it has to be measured in time, not in terms of days or months of employment, but in terms of purchasing power parity dollars per hour per employed person. That's the global comparison. And if we look at that comparison consistently last 10 to 15 years, India has been right at the bottom of the league. Right now, it is $9 purchasing power parity contribution of average Indian to India's gross domestic product, which is a big question mark. Whereas India's highly skilled are the highest producing contributor to the gross domestic product of the countries where they go to. I mean, the issue of brain drain. That's something that I just tend to mention. So what are the challenges before the finance minister while forming this particular budget? So if you look at the data, the budget, then we find that the overall budget allocation, it was 48 lakh crore. Last year it was 45 lakh crore. So it is just 9% increase. And that 9% increase is also reflected in the education budget, which is 8% over the last year's 1.25 lakh crore, over 1.16 lakh crore the year before. We also need to keep in mind that this is 1/4 of the defense budget. So, for the purpose of comparison, we can look at this. But this 9% and 6% increase has to be discounted by the rate of inflation. If we say that the minimum rate of inflation that we have had was about 6%, then you can see that the increase was overall 3%, whereas in education it was just 2%. So is that enough? That's my question. I'm not going to say that this is not enough. I am just flagging the question before us to understand what is likely to be required for India to become Vikasit Bharat by 2047. Vikasit Bharat means India would no longer be part of the global south. It would be part of the global north. It would become a developed country. It would have $5 trillion US dollar equivalent GDP. And of course, the per capita is a question mark. So that is where I think the question lies. And when we come to the IT sector, I find that IT and telecom had 1,16,000 crore in this budget, over 93,000 crore last year. That's a huge jump of 24%. Now, if we look at, for example, scientific departments this year had 32,000 crore. Last year also it had 32,000 crore. So 0% increase in scientific departments. So now we see, I just heard Anita Rampal concerned that what are we doing about our higher education allocation and so on. Now we find that there was a slash, UGC, 60% reduction to the UGC allocation, and NCRT also, of course, NCRT is school education. If we see that as 60% downward, where did this money go? People will ask. Of course, this is a coalition government, and people are saying that this money has been siphoned off to the two parties that supported the government to form the government from, Andhra Pradesh and Bihar. So that these are questions that are being raised, and one tends to understand that corporatization that Anita mentioned is very much relevant here in the context that why to slash the higher education, take higher education's due to raise, to give funds to other compulsions, and why not IT and telecom, which was given 24% increase. I heard the chief economic advisor saying that these are unproductive work. If you have more robotics and you have more artificial intelligence, then you are actually displacing consumers because they are workers there. You don't put money in their pocket, you put money in machines, in infrastructure. But infrastructure and machine and robots and artificial intelligence does not create demand for goods, commodities. So that, I think, he himself said this. So, and in contrast, we find that IT and telecom has been given this boost. So there are these contradictions that one need to look at. I would also like to say that we are a federal state, federal republic, which also Anita mentioned. So I come from Northeast, and Northeast here was mentioned by the finance minister in the budget speech. Now, what is the allocation to the Northeast? The allocation is 5,900 crore this year. Last year, it was 5,892 crore, just 8 crore less than what it is today. And the inflation has eaten up that also. So you say actually there is a deceleration. So when you make a pronouncement in part A of your budget saying Northeast is our baby, we need to give it more. We need to look at its problems of recurring floods and other issues. Then we tend to back that up with enough funds. That is not reflected here. Rather, you find in the case of education, there are announcements. One Indian Institute of Management is being given there. Similarly, other issues of, say, factories for the rail, coach factory is being promised, or semiconductor factory and so on are concerned. So where would this money come from and where would this money go to? Whereas Anita's concern is primary education and secondary education. If we look at that, then we have to look at our population structure. Now, can we look at our population structure? Our last census was 2011. 2021 census did not take place. We do have some projections, sample surveys and others which take us to 2036, projections up to 36. Are we making use of that? That is a question that needs to be understood, because we need to look at two parts of the education problem. One is the enrollments, which is about numbers. The other is quality. Quality of education comes from teachers. Now, whether we are training enough teachers, are we ready to train enough teachers for the year 2047? Who will be the students? Let me read out this. Understanding the size and composition of the relevant 18 to 23 age group cohorts in Northeast population by 2047, and this applies to the entire country also, would be the central comprehending the two crucial determinants, namely size of demand and supply side of higher education, that is the students and the teachers. Now, let us see, the population are called baby boomers 1 and baby boomers 2, who were born in 1946 to 54 and 1955 to 64. That cohort would be in their mid-80s and above in 1947. Then we'll have Gen X, Generation X, those born in 65 to 80, 1965 to 1980, will be in their mid-60s and 60s to 80s. And then Gen Y, which is also called the millennials, born in 1981 to 1996, will be in their mid-40s to mid-60s. Gen X, born in 1997 to 2012 will be in their mid-30s to mid-40s, and Gen Alpha, children born after 2012 till now, will be up to mid-30s. And then Gen Beta, that is the children being born now over the next 5 to 7 years till 2030-31, would become the higher education student cohort of 2047. This is the demand side. But let us look, these would be the students who would have completed elementary and secondary education and ready for higher education. On the supply side of higher education, among the teachers, it will be the millennial or Gen Y attaining the age of 45 to 65 by 2047, who will be eligible professors at the peak of their teaching career. And Gen Z, 35 to 45 year age group, who will be eligible to be associate professors, and those born in 2010, after 2010, in the alpha generation as eligible assistant professors up to the age of 35 years. This is just a prototype. Have we done this exercise? We do not have the data. We have not looked at the crystal ball by depending on the data. We are only shooting arrows in the air. That, I think, is absolutely important, that this particular budget could have addressed that we missed the census. Let's put some money into the census and get it done as soon as possible. That was missing. There are other important issues that need to be, this is northeastern region, but this applies to the entire country. We need to understand that birth rates, death rates, and net migration is what determines the population composition. And in that context, are we ready to revisit the new education policy 2020? Or is it a static policy that it would remain the same ever? I think it would not only vary over time, it needs to vary across states. Northeastern region should have its own specializations. What is Northeast? Northeast is its resources. Now, I call it 3 Ws: water, wind, and willpower. Water power, wind power, and willpower. These are the 3 things that are needed, because there's plenty of water resources in the entire Northeast. Have we exploited that? Wind power, we are talking of climate change. We are talking of green energy. Now, windmills can definitely be thought of. These are examples. But what is most important is the mental health. Mental health is absolutely important. COVID-19 has done enough damage to our youth, to our elderly, and to our teachers, to our administrators, and so on. That has to be restored. And that in the Assam and the Northeast, particularly Assam, has been known as the land of lahe lahe. Lahe lahe means slow. That has been the branding for whatever reason it was. It has to come out. It has to be brought out of that. And for that, the willpower has to be there. That has to be considered. There have been so many projects in Assam, the Brahmaputra project, the Bhorolu River project, for which World Bank gave money, and desilting has not been done. It's gone into private pockets. So similarly, the railway track, which could have given us a broad path through the city of Guwahati, which is the mouthpiece of the entire Northeast with the airport and everything, could have been connected through shifting the railways. But these become political points of contestation rather than development. That's very, very important. One has to take into account whether we think in terms of resource-specific education in different states, in different districts, and so on. So this, I think, is absolutely not being addressed. It was an opportunity missed, that 7 years experience. I think 7 is a very auspicious number. We talk of 7 generation, 7 Saat Fere, and all that, and 7 years each. But I think the finance minister missed that opportunity to reflect on her 7 years experience. We have so many issues. We have the issue of user fees. What is happening? If it is corporatization, if it is privatization, who is going to pay the fees, tuition fee? You and I and our other generations of speakers here, we have all been taught through public education with minimum fee, a token fee. But if we look at the present time, we say we'll give you lower interest rate loans to 1 crore students. What about the others? So one has to have a microscope to look into the plans that have been offered on the plate, and we need to understand that subsidization is very, very important. What happens to teacher salaries? Is anyone likely to come to teaching profession? No, there is a rat race for only NEET kind of thing, the corruption. Why this corruption happens? Why there is a rat race for joint entrance examination? Why there are coaching cities? Why there are suicides, leading to suicides? These are the questions that need to be understood. There are teachers, right now at the end of their career are fighting for their pensions. There is a fight between the old pension scheme and the NPS, and then you find that teachers have lost their dignity. This dignity has to be restored, and I think it was an opportune moment for this budget to make that beginning, even if not for 100% success, because our target is Vikasit Bharat by 2047, which is 23 years away from now, and we do have plenty of time to have that kind of growth. At a slow rate, we would still reach that target. For that we need datafication, we need narratives, and that, I think, is part and parcel of the research that needs to be promoted. I think one can go on and on, but I probably would eat up other people's time, and I would rather...
Maybe in the next round.
Yes, in the next round we can reflect. But thank you for your patient hearing.
Absolutely. I think you raised many important points. Where is the data? Are we really looking into the data, and the kind of data that UDIAS has generated, or for that matter, the Higher Education Survey generates, is also needs to be looked into, because some of these sources really remain absolutely silent on some of the critical indicators. Say, for example, you're talking about a STEM. If one were to perhaps look at the school education and see, okay, what is really happening in the post elementary classes? Are there science labs? What is the allocation that is being carried out in different states at the school level on STEM education? I'm basically a field worker, and just about last week I was touring some of the areas of Gulbarga, and to tell you the truth, in spite of the fact that the state government says that they have almost reached universalization of secondary education, which I believe is not correct. But what we really found was, and therefore anybody can quote any kind of statistics, because they don't have. I mean, if one were to ask as to who goes where, for that matter, we were not talking about Anita was just talking about, and that's a very important point, that when you start assessing the caliber of children at age in class 3 and class 5 and class 7th, I remember having written an article in Frontline, and I said that this is the new Manu Smriti, which in fact is in offing, and what we really see in the villages. That's where much of the youth population is also located. Urban, yes, that component is not as large at the moment as it is in the rural areas. And the government doesn't have any data on STEM education. In urban areas, this has been handed over to private companies in the name of what is called Atal Tinkering Centers, and so on and so forth. And not all schools have this kind of. And Anita ji was absolutely right. The PM Shri school, these schools already exist. their nomenclature is being changed, and some of these schools have already been doing pretty well, at a state level and so on and so forth.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think we also need to have new nomenclature from our kitty, and in the second round, I'm going to mull over that.
Yeah. So now let's have the perspective from Patna. I think where much of NEET problem is also located, but this is not to say that Nalin would only concentrate on that. His first response to the budget 24-25 on education. Over to you, Nalin.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So I am thinking not to touch upon the education part, but to just have a look on the technology research and development, because I am currently also appointed as IPR chair professor by the Ministry of Commerce and Trade, Commerce and Industry. So what I was just going through is especially for research and development, and it shows that compared to other country, the gross expenditure on R&D which India is having is around 0.7% of GDP, and that is lower than the global average. If we see the global average, that is around 1.8% gross expenditure on R&D as a part of GDP. If we see the country-wise data, if we see the neighboring country, China, that is around 2.5%. And if you see United States, that is around 3.46%. If you see Germany's data, that is around 3.13%. France, 2.2%. Japan, again, 3.34%. And the other Asian countries, such as Korea, 4.93%, very huge expenditure on R&D. And Singapore, close to 2%. So when Finance Minister is presenting her budget, and from the budget document itself, this information comes to us, that is again a question for when India is looking for the Viksit Bharat in 2047. So continuing our discussion from education to R&D, if we see the connection between the expenditure on R&D, especially on higher education, reduction of expenditure on higher education, and then we link it with the R&D expenditure, which is very low compared to the world average. This puts us in a very different framework, that what type of target we are basically going to achieve in, because if we are planning today, then R&D expenditure, if we are happening today, probably the fruits will come not today, but the fruits will come after some time, because it is not like today we will do something and tomorrow I will get the result. So that is one point. If we see the support for startups and intellectual property, the budget includes a special focus on these aspects, supporting deep tech startups. And these deep tech startups are basically looking for semiconductors, advanced materials. And again, somewhere we see that our dependency on semiconductor from China, and our dependency for other advanced materials from some of the country, probably we want to become self-sufficient in this, self-sustainable in this particular sector, because we have seen a huge growth of electronic consumption, electronic products consumption, in terms of car, in terms of other electronic devices. One of the huge consumer market India is currently having. So just to sustain this demand and to take care of future future cost. It is true that India has to do something to have their own setup, especially for semiconductor and deep tech startups. So additionally, the Indian Patent Office is also seeing a very record number of patent filing. Close to 1 lakh patent applications India has filed in 2023. It's a big number after independence. There is no doubt. But at the same time, if we connect it with the R&D expenditure, that is very low. And if we again see the R&D funding and innovation part, which was the part of the budget, the government is saying that they are going to operationalize the Anusandhan National Research Fund, and a mechanism which will be set up for supporting private sector driven research and innovation system at a commercial scale, with a financing pool of rupees 1 lakh crore, in line with the announcement in the interim budget. So I was going through that, what will be the percentage of public expenditure and what will be the percentage of private expenditure as a part of R&D funding and innovation. So this funding is close to 28% from the government side, and rest of the money from the private side. So if someone has to look for the innovation under this Anusandhan National Research Fund, one has to also find a partner first, a private party which can really support that type of research. So it's a market-driven. In my mind, I worked on the issue of privatization as my PhD, as a part of my PhD in the School of International Studies, and I was seeing the case of Bangladesh, and then I was looking for India's case of privatization long time back in 2004. But I see that this budget is somehow, especially for R&D sector, for innovation, for emerging technologies, for different type of new startups, we are looking for the private partners. And looking for private partner is not a bad idea. Many countries such as Singapore, Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, they have played major role in having such type of model. But at the same time, there was a huge support from the government in those countries when they were going for such innovation and startups and taking care of which we say as the export promotion model. So when we are looking for export promotion model, we are identifying some of the new areas which will be our leading sector after some time. But these countries have also had a very good expenditure on education and health in past. So without good investment in education and health, without having a good base of human pool, you cannot bring new development and new challenges in today's world. Those countries, those who were having much better human development human development skills or human skills, you can say, and much literate and healthy population, they were in the position to attract more FDI. They were in the position to really have a very good base for the public-private partnership. So this PPP, public-private partnership, words come frequently in the budget when we were looking for this R&D, research and development. And even for National Research Foundation, a substantial allocation of 50,000 crore over 5 years is designated for the NRF. And this initiative aims to foster the research collaboration and enhance India's R&D ecosystem with a significant portion of funding expected from private sector contributors. So for each and every part, whether it is support for the startups, whether it is National Research Foundation, whether it is emerging technologies or innovation, we find that this budget is looking for the private partners. And connecting with this need for private partners, we have to also see the experiences of other countries where such models were very successful. So I find that there are many ambitions which India is really having today, looking ahead in terms of making this country more developed. But at the same time, the expenditures reduced in higher education, and then asking for market to come up with more investment for innovation, for startups, for National Research Foundation, for more emerging technologies. It is not really giving us a very confident way to say that India has a very very well-planned mechanism to attract the private parties. So private parties, private investment is the need of hour, and there is no doubt that each and everything government cannot and should not do by their own resources. But at the same time, when we are looking for private partners and private parties, we have to also see that what we should have first, what in which areas and which sector we have to have a very clear-cut level playing field compared to other countries of the world today. Because private parties can go to any country, whether it is a domestic private partner or whether it is an international private partner. If the world is open, if the investment is ready to go anywhere, as per WTO's rules and regulations, the investor can go to any country, and any investors can come to our country also. But at the same time, where the investor will go, in which country they will knock the door, where the doors are open, and if the doors are open, then where they are going to sustain their investment. So these are the larger questions on which the policymakers has to also think. Theoretical framework is one thing, but implementation of those structure, those planning depends on what history you have, what base you have, what experiences you have captured from other country, and how basically you are leading your country in the new direction. That is my point on the R&D expenditure related to the current budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Nalin. Thank you for raising something, which in such greater detail. There are questions, which we can certainly reflect upon. Your point is well taken, but there are 2 points, which we will, I think, the viewers would need some kind of clarity. You talked about history of R&D and so on and so forth, and each country has its own specific history, and that's very well taken. So, do we really do we have any kind of data to support as to what has been the investment or what has been the contribution of the private sector in India in R&D? I mean, that would be one of the most crucial aspects to talk about when we say 28% is going to come from the government, the rest is going to come from the private. Then it has to fit in some kind of a trend. I mean, the kind of an incremental change that we require in the private sector. That is also something, whether the policy, whether the government programs really encourage that kind of an situation or scenario to emerge. And secondly, when we say we want to become Atmanirbhar in technology in terms of certain materials, very important. But it is in the same budget that we have taken off import duties from, and especially with one of our partners, China, and which will really have, I mean, where you really see this contradiction that we want to be Atmanirbhar in certain ways, but when we are going to get things, which should be repackaged and reassembled rather than produced here, because it's going to be much cheaper coming from if we were to import without any kind of an import duties and all that. So we are encouraging China and Chinese penetration in our Indian market, discouraging Indian producers and once, the product doesn't come into the market and they are not in a position to produce, then naturally it is going to have what you can call it a negative spiral impact on R&D also. So there has to be a clarity on this particular aspect, which I think would come up in the second round. I think, we'll now quickly move on to Professor Mona Khare, who looks after the educational finance at the NUPA. And then we'll go on to Professor Saumen Chattopadhyay and Professor Dr. Reddy. Sorry, Dr. Reddy, for keeping you waiting, but we'd like to have your views at the end.
No problem.
Over to you, Professor Mona Khare.
Very good afternoon, sir, and thank you very much for this opportunity to the IMPRI organizers and also to Professor Sinha for inviting me to share my views on this panel of extremely esteemed academicians, senior academicians who have been doing a lot of work, and I have been listening to them very intently. Already the earlier speakers have highlighted a couple of aspects of the recent budget announcements. Certainly, if we look at the gross figures only, one may feel happy in the sense that there has been an increase in the allocation to the education sector. But as has been pointed rightly by my earlier speakers, also many of these values or figures have to be analyzed in terms of their percentage allocations or in terms of their the trends in the general economic prosperity or growth of the economy, and also vis-a-vis the announcements or the provisions or the emphasis that has been made in the new education policy. We all know that we are already in the 4th year of the implementation of the policy. And if we go by the 4 basic pillars that made the foundation of the new education policy and which were in a way announced as early as in the 12th 5-year plan, the 4 E's, of which the 3 E's were very much a part of the 12th 5-year plan document in itself, where we were talking about enrollments, equity and excellence in the education sector, and later when we also added the 4th E, that is employability. But what we see today is the gross amount that we are all quoting for the education sector is the combined amount for the education, employment and skilling. So one can see, as was in a way proposed in the national education policy, that education has to be seen in connect with employment and skill development. This is something which maybe the budget is trying to also portray. But if we go deeper into analyzing the facts and figures, one can very clearly see that although the absolute value may have gone up, the absolute allocations to education may have gone up, but when we compare it to the previous budgets, previous year's budgetary provisions, one can clearly see that as compared to the budget estimates, there might have been an increase. I was just trying to look at how the current budget, if we classify or if we break it down to school and higher education, just that 2 broad dimensions of it, one can see that for the year 23-24, as compared to the budgetary estimates, there has been an increase of about 4.2%. But when we compare it to the revised estimates of the previous year, one finds that there is just a marginal increase. It is not even 1%. It is somewhere around 0.775 or somewhere around that. Similarly, for the higher education sector, one sees an increase vis-a-vis the budgetary estimates of the previous year. But when we compare it to the revised estimates of the previous years, there is a drastic decrease of about 16.8%. Now, this in itself says a lot about what we can expect in future. Because as we all know, the enrollments in the higher education sector have been growing at a pace as never before. And we were trying to do some analysis based on the public expenditures in the higher education sector. One can very clearly see a fast decline in the per student availability of public funds in the higher education sector. This certainly has its toll on quality and also equity angle. Now, since I'm talking about percentage shares, now when we measure the percentage shares vis-a-vis some other indicators, two other important indicators that we look at is what is the percentage share in terms of social sector expenditure and what is the percentage share in terms of total expenditure. Now, if we look at the figures from that point of view, one can clearly see that the share of education sector in the social sector expenditure, instead of increasing, has gone down. It was about 42.4% in the year 17-18, then came down to 38.9 in the year 2021, and now it is even lesser, 35.3%. Similarly, if we look at the share of education in total expenditure, again one can find a decline in that. Now, we all know that government is withdrawing from the education sector. Social sector has always been the last priority of the government. Health and education, certainly, of the two, have always faced the brunt. But then with a population that is young, we have all spoken about, Professor Khadria was referring to the demographics of our own country. Needless to say, that this kind of a trend is not or should not be welcomed. More so, why I'm saying this is because if we go by this year's budget document, one can clearly see the shift in government's vision towards promoting the loan schemes. How there has been there are so many announcements in terms of promoting the loan schemes for students with more interest subsidies to be given to them, e-vouchers to about 1 lakh students, so on and so forth. So how the government, through its policy and budgetary announcements as well, is trying to push the students more towards taking loans. And there are several cases and several studies which have already thrown light on the serious implications of this kind of a trend of the government. Also, needless to say that although in the new education policy we have now given a very expanded definition of the SEDGs, the socio-economically disadvantaged communities, we are also talking about a gender inclusion fund, an inclusion fund. We spoke about creating or making provisions for talented children, how to nurture the innate talents of the children, gifted children, so on and so forth. But there is hardly any talk about any of these funds to be created or any announcements with regards to these funds. Now, these are important when we are talking about bringing children not just from the disadvantaged communities, but also from the geographically disadvantaged regions or socially disadvantaged regions into the fold of formal education. Another segment of the education sector, which I think has not got enough attention, is the ECCE. We started with, in the new education policy, we started with announcing the formalization of the ECCE and how Anganwadis have to be strengthened in terms of providing wholesome care and education to this tender group of children. But one sees that there is hardly any specific announcements made towards this particular subsector in the education. The only somewhat satisfactory announcements that one could actually visualize were in terms of the announcements regarding internships provisions for the children, and how the government is trying to say that through the CSR funds, the private sector needs to be roped in to provide, to ensure, rather, not just provide, but to ensure a large number of internships to the students, and also the stipends to be given along with that. Now, in several of the studies, and one such study was conducted by us at NIPA also, this aspect had got highlighted as to why internships are important, and internships of a higher duration, longer duration are important, and why stipends are an extremely important requirement of the students while they are going for internships. Now, this is something which is welcome. However, we certainly need to see how it unfolds itself, because these are only announcements. As far as some of these studies, because we don't have concrete data on this, but as far as some of the studies have pointed out, that although education is one of the prime sector where CSR investments are coming to, but a majority of the companies do not have any kind of a concrete CSR policy in terms of how they want to invest in the education sector. Also, our own higher education institutions do not have any kind of a resource mobilization policy or resource or networking policy for resource integration or generation, and therefore there is always a gap between the industry and the academia in terms of trying to build this kind of a network which can be sustained over a long period of time. So how we are going to implement this very announcement and the provisions that have been made in the new education policy are yet to be seen. But yes, this announcement that 500 top companies would now be roped in to provide internships to more than 1 crore youth in the country is certainly a welcome announcement. Also, what I would like to highlight here is in terms of research and development, already Dr. Reddy has already thrown some light on that. But
Professor Nalin talked about it.
sorry, okay,
Professor Reddy
I'm
is here
sorry.
to
Yeah,
speak.
yeah,
Yeah.
Professor Nalin has already thrown some light on that. But if you look at the schemes, or if you just go through the budget a little more like scheme wise, if you look at the allocations and all, what you observe is mostly the announcements for research innovation have come in the field of science, technology, new areas, AI, robotics, and also there is some portions which have been announced for Indian knowledge system. Now, in all this, where does the social science and general academics disciplines find a place, where majority of our students are enrolled, is also something to be seen. There is an announcement for opening improving or strengthening the world-class institutions. There are announcements to improve and strengthen the ITIs. So there is certainly a focus on skilling and vocationalization. But in all this, where does the social science and general academics find its place is something for us to ponder upon. And yep. And
You know,
then,
we can
yes.
come back to you, Professor Khare.
Okay.
I mean, yeah,
All right.
the
Okay.
second
Okay.
round, you know,
All right. Thank you.
let's
Thank you.
have,
Yes.
because we are already at close to 4:20 and
Sure. Sure.
two of our speakers have yet to come in.
Absolutely.
So over to Professor Saumen Chattopadhyay.
Yes. So thank you, Professor Sinha, and all my fellow panelists. And thanks to IMPRI for giving me the opportunity to share my understanding and concern about the emerging scenario in education. I will focus on higher education in particular. Now, the budgetary allocation and the increase compared to the revised estimate and the budgetary allocation made for 23-24 have to be understood, have to be visited in the context of the implementation of the NEP. Now, the national education policy has actually made the education policy as a very major instrument of the economic policy. This is not to deny the role of education for an inclusive society and for the polity. Now, there are three components of that I will be trying to refer to. And some of the points have already been covered by the previous speakers. So to an extent, it would be repetitive. So the three components are the focus on skill, because that has been a major concern for the government, that the education sector, the two domains, education and employment, the linkage has got weaker because of the rapid technological advancement that we have been witnessing in the field of technology, as well as we are also being accused of churning out unemployable graduates. So the focus on skill education is very much there in NEP. And if we look at the budgetary allocations and the finance minister's speech, then it is evident that the focus on skill education is very much there. So I'm not going to discuss this. The second is the role of research and innovation. Professor Bharti has already talked about it. Professor it has been talked about by the other speakers as well. So what is the role of research and innovation and how it is being looked at? And the third is this NEP and the budgetary allocation is also going to address one very important objective of the government of India, that is how to position the Indian science, the Indian knowledge system in the realm of the global academy, in the realm of the global science. That means positioning of India's science and technology, the achievement in the sphere of the global science and technology. Now, what are the indications for this? The first of all, the finance minister said that for the space in the next 10 years, the budgetary allocation will be raised by 5 times. And she also said that a venture capital fund of 1,000 crore would be set up. Now, space is that part of science, what we refer to as mode 1 of the fundamental, the fundamental research, the blue sky research. Now here, the role of government is inevitable because of the market failure, but increasingly, as we can see even in the world, in the Western world, the private sector is playing an increasing role. So the space, we have done very well in terms of Chandrayaan and Aditya. So that has put India in the global map. And the intention of the government is very clear that India should be viewed in the global arena, that it's somebody leading in the space technology. And that is why the public sector funding and followed by the venture capital setting up, which will, I believe, which will also allow the private sector to come in. Now, what about the other two components? You see, the National Research Foundation, Professor Bharti has already mentioned, 28% public sector share. Now, this is a little problematic. Now, when the NEP has categorized the universities in terms of research university, teaching university, and autonomous degree granting colleges, and I believe the fund would be allocated on competitive basis to a large extent possible, then the research universities would appropriate a majority of the grants to be given by the private sector. Now, what we can therefore infer that when we are spending heavily on space, I'm not saying that the funding for space should be curtailed. What I'm saying that yes, the private sector is pumping in, is going to pump in more money for applied researches. But if you look at the school education and higher education, how science is being done in the lab, I think the budgetary allocation for the broad-based science is poor. It's very, very limited. This tendency to differentiate the higher education system is very much clear when we look at the budgetary allocation for the world-class university, what we call institutions of eminence. The budgetary allocation is going to be raised from the revised estimate of 1,300 crore to 1,800 crore. Now, what is the mandate of the world-class university? To feature in the top 100 in the global ranking by the Times, QS, and ARWU, the Shanghai Jiatong, and their performances are going to be measured by the global ranking. So the budgetary allocation being raised for the WCU, the world-class university, by 20%, when their assessment is going to be measured by the global ranking indicators, which emphasize to the extent of 70% towards research. And the public good character of education, the inclusive role that the institutions can potentially play, are therefore getting compromised. Now, if you look at some of the budgetary allocations of Spark and GIAN in the budget, again, you will see that this internationalization and globalization and global positioning of the Indian science are very much emphasized upon, whether it is investment in space technology, in the space science or space technology, or in terms of some of this. Now, international globalization is very debatable because there are competitive elements, there are collaborative elements, and they blend together to present a picture which is very, very complex, and it varies with respect to the context. So the science funding, therefore, what I believe that the broad-based science is getting neglected, right? So there is an allocation of funding towards certain sectors, towards certain universities, WCU and all those things. And then the overall science, Professor Anita Rampal is already here. She would be able to, she has been working on this area. I mean, the science, the expenditure on science in the university level is getting somewhat compromised. Now, you see, there are a couple of things I would like to mention here, that Indian higher education system is already differentiated in terms of a couple of things. And this differentiation is getting more and more accentuated. The first differentiation, as NEP has already done it, and it is inevitable. I'm not blaming NEP for this. Research university, teaching university, and autonomous degree granted colleges. This is inevitable. All universities cannot really be specializing on this. At the same time, the higher education institutions are being given autonomy to become autonomous institutions. The colleges are also expected to become autonomous institutions. Now, if you expect the autonomy of the institutions to become autonomous and compete with each other, then it's a very simple that we learn in economics, that there can be competition only when that there does exist a level playing field. And in the NEP, does emphasize that education or higher education is a quasi-public good, and therefore, for the education as a whole, the 6% of GDP should be the target, and we are nowhere near that. So one is this. The second categorization of Indian higher education is getting also accentuated, is the public-private divide, because the way things are happening in India, I think the private funded universities are going to play a larger role. The second, the dimension which again differentiates the Indian higher education system is the center and the state. So when you're looking at the state budget alone, when you're looking at the center budget alone, the union budget, we are not getting a comprehensive picture of what is happening with some of the states which are very, very fiscally strained, fiscally constrained states, right? So what is happening there? So the overall situation has to be understood in terms of not only the union budget, but also the state budget. I'm sorry, I don't have the state budget numbers right now, but one thing is very clear, that in real terms, in per capita terms, the budget for higher education has not been rising at all. And the second is the professional versus the general education. The kind of emphasis we are giving for the skill education and professional education and the emphasis that we are giving for the general education, I believe, despite all the rhetoric that we are referring to, harping on, the multidisciplinarity and all those things, I think the general education, it's bound to decline. One particular component of the budget, Prof. Khare was mentioning, it's there in the budget. There is something called grants to council and the institutions of excellence for humanities and social sciences. There's something like that. And the budgetary allocation was 400 crore for 23-24. We did not spend 400 crore. We ended up spending 300 crore. And this year, 24-25, the budgetary allocation has been reduced from 400, the budgetary one, to only 350, right? So the focus is not for humanities and social sciences, though we are talking about multidisciplinarity and all, but the institutions are not doing that. The second thing, I will not take much time here, even if it is the first round, you see the financing of education as indicated by the loan. Professor Mona Khare has already talked about it. I will not go into that, but you have to understand what is happening in terms of the emphasis that is being laid on higher education financing agency, HIPAA. Now in the budget, this HIPAA component is now being explicitly shown. The centrally funded institutions are now being asked to take loans from HIPAA, and the interest will be paid by the government, but we have to pay for the repayment of the capital. Now, repayment of the capital for a university where I work, and paying 500 crore inevitably would lead to the raising of the fees. I understand the fees have not been raised for many years now in our university, but I'm talking about not my own university or Professor Sinha's university or Professor Khadria's university. I'm talking about the system as a whole. And the fee, therefore, the cost of education is bound to rise over a period of time. Now, look at some of the allocation of these, some sectors here. Then I will stop. I said that research and innovation is being emphasized upon to spur growth, right? And I've talked about mode 1 and mode 2, fundamental and applied research. Professor Bharti has already talked about it. Look at the research innovation budget component that is mentioned there. The increase in research and innovation budget, I'm not going into the components of it, is massive. 210 crore budgetary estimate is going to be raised to 355 crore for 24-25. That is 69% rise. And in this very year, 23-24, the revised estimate, we could not spend what we had budgeted for. That means we budgeted for 210. The revised estimate is 193. So 17 crore, is a shortfall. Even then, we are raising the budgetary estimate for research and innovation for this year. Digital e-learning. Again, the budgetary rise from 400 to 480 crore, that is a 20% rise. See, the digitization of the higher education sphere is absolutely important for the government. It would help the government to achieve 50% enrollment rate without there being much of an increase in the cost of education, because a digital classroom can accommodate more students. A marginal cost does not rise with the rise in enrollment. So digitization is absolutely important to reach that figure without there being any commensurate enhancement in the budgetary allocation for higher education. Digitization is absolutely essential for also the implementation of the academic bank of credit. When you are giving freedom to the students without digitization, without pushing for blended learning, you cannot give, because it's a service sector, right? So the students are now liberated from the department, liberated from the classroom. So there is an increasing thrust on this. So what is the overall situation that is happening? The overall situation is the system is getting increasingly differentiated because of inadequate budgetary allocation and competitive allocation. The private sector is coming in, digitization is taking place, internationalization is being fostered, but what would happen overall? That the fees would rise and it would actually hamper the inclusiveness that the higher education sector is expected to deliver. The inclusiveness, if we look at the enrollment figure, we don't get a complete picture. In order to get a complete picture about what is happening with the inclusivity of higher education, You have to look at admission policy of the private funded institution, which we hardly talk about. JNU is doing its job. All central universities are doing their job, the admission policy. What about the private funded universities? Are they doing what is expected? No, because you can't blame them either, because they are not getting any support from the government. They run on grant and cost recovery. These are the two, the endowment and cost recovery. These are the two major components of them, and so therefore they will do what they know that they should be doing. So central universities budget rise, IIT rise, IISER and Indian Institute of Information Technology, the budget have been declined. So IIM, again, there's a massive decline in the budget, basically pushing for professional courses, go for HIPAA and all. So the overall situation is that the budgetary allocation are getting concentrated in certain sectors for certain instruments, right? And if you foster competition without there being a rise in the budgetary allocation, then the system is getting more and more differentiated, and therefore the inclusivity will suffer. Yes, we will do well in science, in certain sectors of science, but the broad-based science is going to suffer. Cost of education is going to rise. The loan already been talked about. One important policy is being talked about world over. It's called income contingent loan. That means the loan has to be repaid by the student if they get a good job. The earning is over and above a threshold limit, right? So it is linked to this thing. But here we are giving subsidy to the loan and subvention to the extent of 3% of the loan amount. So the kind of importance that we should get, higher education being the second or third largest, Indian higher education is the second and third largest in the world. And it is expected to play a massive role in a country where there are disparities of all kinds, right? I think we'd have to rethink about the role of education and how much we can do to really truly build up an inclusive society. Thank you very much. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Professor Chattopadhyay. Now we go on to Dr. Reddy. Over to you, Dr. Reddy.
Thank you, Professor Sinha, and also the fellow panelists. I am here just to share a few thoughts. I will take 5 minutes time, not more than that, to share my views on this budget. So we are talking about the budget of this is annual in nature. So year after year it comes some kind of thing. But I would like to see that overall perspective. I know when you look at the budget, how to one has to see the impact point of view. So we have the Right to Education Act in 2009, National Education Policy 2020. These are the two major, bigger landmarks, you can say that in terms of school education point of view, education point of view. So keeping those things in the perspective kind of thing. So to ensure that Right to Education Act, to make it happen across the country, it's meeting the standards and norms of RTE. Whether we are fulfilled fully or not, that's the question. One has to look at it. And second thing is about the NEP, talks about the National Education Policy, and to make the policy real. And it talks about many interventions at the school level and the education level also. So when it comes to the school education level, we're talking about the ECC strengthening, the bottom of the pyramid, base of the education system, ECC, and the primary school level and kind of thing, where if you have a good, strong foundation, when the children are moving from that level to the middle and senior secondary level, they can be a very good transition with learning and development and all those things. And come to the academic performance. So year on year after, how we are performing in academics as per the National Achievement Survey or ASER or any foundation level of assessments, what we have been happening there. And digital, especially you see, COVID was happened there, and the schools were shut for more than 500 days. And the schools like Khadria Vidyalaya, Navodaya Vidyalaya, some elite schools, they used to run the schooling online, but the children studying in government schools totally deprived or denied because of lack of digital infrastructure in the schools. But still, the situation is that I don't see drastic change. It is there in kind of thing. And the STEM education we're talking about. So Niti Aayog has done set up ATL labs in terms of the schools and some other places set up the schools. But India, the country, we need much more than what currently we set up the kind of thing. So keeping all those things to realize RT norms standards and NDP aspirations and the kind of thing. So we look at the budget that is annual in nature, but I want to say 4 aspects about it. One is it incremental or transformational kind of thing? So we talk about 6% of the budget GDP you had allocated. So if you see last 10 years of time, the budget is varying between 2.7% to the 2.9%. So it is just moving between 2.7 to 2.9%, but not moving ahead. So there is a, instead of incremental, unless until the government make it 6%, there's a jump of double what it's allocating now. You can't see much intended change or the quality or improvement to talk about. Second thing, allocation and spending. We say allocation is not adequate, understood. At the same time, what are allocated, whether we spend it, and if we not spent, why? So this is the issue of the governance part, the timing part, how we are doing it. What I hearing and observing that most of the budget spent, the last leg of the financial year, that is January to March and kind of thing. So how this can be streamlined, the governance part, what are the budget allocated to be well utilized without any wastage or unutilized budget kind of thing. The third thing is about allocation and the savings. One is what are the limited resources we have, you are allocating under different heads and kind of thing. In the savings part, especially I'm talking about the rationalization. We have the schools, especially as part of DPEP, Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan. We set up the schools across the country to meet the norms of 1 kilometer radius of the primary schools. In today's situation, because of the number of children per family is reduced because of the family planning, low birth rate kind of thing, many various reasons and kind of thing. And private schools are on the other side has come up kind of thing. The number of children in those primary schools are very less in number, unless until you can look at it, how do you rationalize to promote the quality education without compromising on that, how to provide the access to the children, various means and kind of thing. So that is one thing you can see. You can say a lot of money. It's not you are allocating the money, but you can say a lot of money, but that money can be used for the promotion of the quality of education in the system. This is the third thing I'm talking about. The fourth one is about the augmentation of the resources. So beyond what government is contributing and kind of thing, why do you just be limit to that? So why don't you see, open up, for example, one is the CSR. So there are 30,000 crores of CSR money annually being spent by various companies. Out of that, 30% goes to the education and skilling. That is equivalent to 9,000 crores. Apart from that, there's a lot of philanthropy is happening, and the economy is growing, and high net worth individuals are the wealthy people growing, and they are moving to support various social causes. So philanthropic funding is another option is there. And I talk about the FCRA funding, though there is some limitation of FCRA funding nowadays, but how do we encourage that FCRA funding for the education system and kind of thing, get more resources? And the new financial instruments we talk about, outcome-based finances, social stock exchange, and embedded finance. These are the new things that are also evolving. So as a government, how it can facilitate beyond its own resources, the other resources can flow into the system where we have the proper platforms and frameworks and structures which can facilitate their participation in the education system. So because of, you take care of all these 4 things, the increase of the allocation, and talking about allocation and spending, where we are into the governance, and allocation and savings, where we talk about rationalization and augmentation of the external resources kind of thing. With this, we can see how we can see the change if you made the RT norms and the NAP, what we are aiming for that. I stop it here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Reddy. I think, we have come to the an end of the first round, and we are already overshot the timing. It was only up to 4:30, but then, we have already exceeded. But then there are a couple of issues, which have been raised, and I think, we should have very brief second round on some of these issues. Of course, the Professor Rampal talked about, gave the entire perspective. I mean, the very comprehensive perspective on how the new liberal capitalism and the state neoliberal state is looking at education, and how this is a budget which in fact is going to further promote privatization, and therefore and it is also going to really impact academic freedom and so on and so forth. Other panelists, Professor Binod Khadria, talked about STEM education, and he also looked at as to what is going to happen when UGC funding is slashed by about 60%, corporatization, and most importantly, in the regional context, looking at the fact that India is a union of states. In the spirit of federalism, our educational issues are not just the same everywhere, and therefore, there has to be a certain kind of a role of the state governments to also come in. They do shoulder the discussion on union budget on education should not give out this impression that the states do very little. I mean, in fact, they are the ones who share the burden of the cost of education in much more significant manner than perhaps the central government does. I believe, if Saumen normally has all these statistics on his fingertips, but maybe, maybe we leave it for some other occasion. Nalin talked about, Nalin talked about, the private parties and that is where the direction is, which also was pointed out by Dr. Reddy. One issue which in fact is very important, and that comes to my mind, where I would like to have your, given the fact that, we are, Mr. Reddy talked about, whether it is incremental or transformational. I believe, a certain kind of a transformation of education has already taken place. Going by, the way it's getting, what Saumen was talking about, differentiation and accentuation of that differentiation, where I believe, and there is statistics to support that there is a significant degree of segregation, between the private and the public institutions, where even within the public institutions, there are various kinds of public institutions where, you have students of a certain background. So can we say, and that in fact is also visible from the NSSO 75th round, that if one were to perhaps look at the GER of, say, a certain segment of the social category, then while everybody has been doing a little better than what they did earlier, but then, the higher, what you can property classes, the traditionally high caste, let me put it like this, the non-SC, ST, non-OBC category, which we can put in some non-Muslim also, then, the remainder has already attained a level of GER, which in fact could be comparable to anywhere in the world. And therefore, the direction that in fact has been put forward, that direction that the last few budgets in the last 7-8 years that we can see, and this is a continuation of the same, are we really trying to strengthen that process where, okay, there would be world-class education for some, and there would be others who could be going to any other institution where quality education is not the concern. Now, if you have this kind of segregation and segmentation, which in other words, in a much more respectable manner, or non-offending manner, one can call it differentiation from within, but I would call it is very much a policy of a very much a kind of a deliberate policy to in fact look at as to what is really happening in the field of employment and the way labor and the constructing, in the neoliberal framework, where privatization and profit motive remains one of the most important considerations. What comes to CSR and to education through CSR is something, that needs further examination. But then, this point has to be looked at. That are we really consolidating that tendency? One, of course, is the neoliberal framework, which of course is there. But then, I would like to have your attention. Mona ji talked about, Professor Khare talked about, inclusion, and that's what is the important point that we really not need to talk about. It's not only the socio-economic disadvantaged groups, but if you look at it and if you carry out exercises, we go by the macro level data, state level data, some kind of a pattern at the national level. But if one were to perhaps look at, and I'm a geographer, so I always look at statistics at the sub-district level. Now that, some such data is available, it appears very clearly as to what is happening where. If you look at the kind of institutions which have been closed down in the name of non-viable, economically non-viable or academically non-viable, I really don't understand this. You have a situation where one can say, where smaller the number of children in a school, better would be the quality input, but then here the narrative is very different. If you have less than 30 enrollment in a primary school, the demographics is to be blamed for that. And why should we blame the demographic? It's good that people are producing less children. On average, village of 1,000 to 1,500 would not have so many students, so many children in 6 to 14 or 6 to 18 year age group to provide you so many students, which could be seen as viable. So therefore, closing down institutions, creating excess. You have the data which tells you as to how many institutions have been already closed down. And there is a lot of talk which is going on smaller schools. Then we create a kind of a impression that we are trying to really promote foundational education through ECCE and early childhood education. And Monaji rightly pointed out what is happening with the Anganwadi. Do they have any kind of a perspective planning on this particular question? So, on school education and higher education, I think, this important what you can call it, dichotomies that we really talked about, and there's been a series of them. Everybody agrees that there is some change in certain sectors, decline in some other subsectors of higher education. Maybe it gets corrected next year, but at the moment, I see it's going in the direction that everybody is really concerned about. So, quick one round, very brief, in about 2 minutes each, before we conclude this. I'll now again go back to Anita ji for her 2 minutes reflection on some of these concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. I think many of the things have come up, but I will just focus on one or two. PM3, was, of course, there are a number of schools that have been identified, and they say they've allocated for 5 years 6,000 crores for this year, sorry. But there's another program called STARS, which has been almost doubled, a lot of funding for it. Now, this is a program which started because World Bank funding came in as a small component, but now it's been used for various other things, so there's 6 states which have been taken, including Kerala and Himachal. The focus, as they call it, is to strengthen teaching and learning and results. STARS is teaching, learning, and results. Now, again, what is intriguing is how they insist, even for a state like Kerala, to show that they're doing teacher education and teacher training and teacher refresher through online programs. So, rather than say that you're doing good work and in what intensive way can be better plan our teacher professional development, the emphasis is that you will get funding and you will get points in this program if you show that you've converted it completely to online. So the press for these things has another, has an underlying thrust, which is problematic, which one has to see, because and also the ways of measuring. Again, how do you measure it? And the second thing I want to say is that through the program called Vidyanjali, which is a volunteer program, which they say that they have already got 5 lakh volunteers, and they've got 7.5 lakh schools or something. 1.5 crore children are being benefited last year. This again is questionable because it gives open access to a school, which even researchers don't get. We don't get access to a school if our researchers want to go in. But here, if you claim you're a volunteer and you register with this program, you can be in, and they're promoting retired army people, armed forces personnel. So we know, again, what is this patriotism, or what values do you want to push, or diaspora. So, these people get, so I think that this again is questionable, because you claim it's a community participation run by the local school, but then the agenda is something else, and we need to question that. Thank you.
Correct. That's correct. Yeah, Professor Khadria. You have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I have just now. That's what I tend to forget. Yes, I think I'll zero in to the other side of the budget, which is receipts. We have talked about expenditure. I think Professor Reddy mentioned about where the money will come from.
Yeah.
And that's a big question, because if we look at the receipts, the expenditure is 48 lakh crore, the receipts are 46 lakh crore. Nothing strange about that. Gross tax are 38 lakh crore. Corporate tax is 10 lakh crore. Income tax is 11 lakh crore. GST is 10 lakh crore. So you can see the divide. I don't have time to comment on that. Now the question is, if you withdraw, there is a withdrawal of the state from the education, then that amounts to, there is a saying we learned right in our childhood, which says, killing the goose that lays the golden egg.
Right.
Now, what we have been talking about, 6% of the GDP should go to education, as if we are begging. We have been begging, and the states have been denying and saying not even touching 3%. It's 1/4 of the defense and blah, blah, all kinds of excuses are given. And we are all the time having the beggar's bowl without an argument. Have we ever looked at the argument? Why did Kothari Commission put it at 6%? What was the rationale? We never asked ourselves. I did that exercise. I published it. I did that exercise. I published it in EPW. And then I also had done work for the Ministry of Program Statistics and Program Implementation for Index of Service Production in Education, because education is under services in trade, trade in services. Trade in services. To cut a long story short, I called that brief note in EPW GDP in education or education in GDP. That is because the contribution of the education as an industry, as a sector, to the gross domestic product is of the amount right now, $225 billion US.
Oh.
That amounts to 6%, 6.25% of our GDP comes from education sector. So what we are asking is less than what we are giving. We are asking only 6%. You are taking away from us, you are getting from us our teachers' salaries, our workers' salaries, our administrators' salaries, all the production that happens in education sector is actually more than 6%. And that is why we need to say it with confidence that we don't need any other source. You just give it back to us. That's what we need to argue for. And I think that there's a strong ground to keep on harping on this, that we are not going to have the beggar's bowl. We'll demand it because this is our constitutional right. Thank you.
Great. Professor Nalin.
Yeah, thank you, sir. So one of my students who is currently working on RDFDI, research and development, how much percentage of FDI is reaching to research and development. Mr. Saurabh, he is currently working, and his study shows that hardly 1% of FDI is reaching to R&D. It means that a majority of the investment is reaching here for making something in India, not contributing for the knowledge, not contributing in the knowledge sector. So if we have to become only the manufacturers for others, then this process can continue. But when we are looking for private investment, especially in innovation, emerging technologies, then we have to see our history, our past. That's why I was saying that what was the trend in past. And so the trend in past is not very good in terms of attracting FDI for R&D. So probably this study will be the first study in India which is looking for the RD FDI. And we are also looking for where India has signed its comprehensive economic partnership agreement, such as Japan and Korea and other countries. And we are also comparing that what happened after signing these agreements with these countries. So whether it has influenced some R&D. My own field work in Tokyo revealed that Japan is not at all interested in RD FDI. Japan is interested for FDI in India for manufacturing cars, but not for RD FDI. The RD FDI percentage in China from Japan is much higher than RD FDI in India. So it shows that India is not at all a, you can say, a innovator partners or the R&D partners for the world economy. But it is high time that when geopolitical scenario is changing, investors are moving from China, it is high time that we have to also see that how we can catch some FDI, especially in R&D sector. Probably the target in our budget for attracting private investments will not only look for the domestic private investments, but also look for the international investors to come and help our ongoing R&D activities and also to become the knowledge partner. And not only for this year, this financial year, but also for the next few financial years so that our partnership can grow further and it can lead to further R&D and innovation and new technology development. Thank you.
You are muted, Sachi. Sachidanand, you have to, yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Professor Mona Khare, your last line. Less than 2 minutes, because we have exceeded the Zoom time, right? Is Professor Khare there? If not, then let's switch on. Move on to Professor Reddy.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So I think Professor Saumen is there. I think
No,
we
it's
let him.
fine. I will,
Okay.
I will
He
come
wanted
after
to be
you. I
the
will come
last
after you.
person. He will have the last line.
Okay, thank you. I'll just take
Yeah,
one
I think.
sentence.
I think Professor Khare is there. Professor Khare is there.
Please.
Yeah. Last few sentences, Professor Khare, on some of the issues that you have been part of. You have been following the discussion. Yeah.
Am I audible now, sir?
Yeah, you are audible. You're on.
Right. So you also emphasized upon the disparity angle, and I'll just try to maybe highlight something more from the budget this time. We were also talking about how the new budget is pushing the institutions more towards taking loans for developmental purposes, and this is also very clearly evident if we look at the capital expenditure trends. Although for the overall economy, one can see that there has been an increase in the capital expenditure over the years. But when we look at the component of capital expenditures for the higher education sector, one finds that there has been a decline. And possibly the explanation that we can give is because of this HEFA, which has now come on the scene. And when we look at, see, the budget anyways, is limited, and now here we all understand that the HEFA loans are interest-free loans, And also the repayment of the principal amount has to be supported by the government's budget. Now this in a way is again helping already the technical education sector, professional education sector, or the central universities which are now eligible for taking loans from HEFA. So although they are taking loans for their developmental expenditures from the HEFA, they are being reimbursed in various ways or maybe supported by way of being interest free from the government budgets. And when I was looking at this angle, what I find is that the proportion of budget which has gone for this very purpose for the institutions like IIMs, for ISERs, etc., have more than doubled. And this itself shows in what direction the policy of moving towards loan schemes for developmental purposes is going to. So this is going to have very serious implications for the majority of our institutions which are starving for funds for good infrastructure, and especially today when we are talking about integrating high grade technology infrastructure also in our educational landscape. So these are maybe some concerning aspects when we are looking at technology integration in a big way to remove equity and to improve the equity and inclusion component as well as quality component in the education sector. Another important dimension was internationalization, which had been one of the focus areas of the government in the national education policy. But other than the Study in India scheme that has got some allocation in this budget, we do not find anything else. So what is it that we are trying to do in terms of promoting internationalization at home? Because it is not just about study in India, it is not just about bringing students to India. So what is it that we are trying to do on that front, when as in some of our fellow panelists have also highlighted how IKS has to be brought at the global level. So how are we thinking of linking the two is also something that we may look at whenever we are trying to analyze and put in some suggestions for improvements in any of our writings. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Saumen, would you like to come in?
No, after Suresh ji, after Suresh ji.
Okay. Dr. Suresh Reddy.
Yes. Just my thought is that we divide the education, that the primary education and the early childhood education ECCE as a where we have to focus on the quality.
We didn't cover that. I think that really requires a separate meeting, but
yes,
a separate panel discussion, because ECCE and dovetailing it with mother and child development and a whole lot of, because interministry, that really requires a
yes.
separate
So
discussion. That's
where
what
we met almost all gross enrollment ratio we met, but focus on the quality. And
Right.
come to the high school and secondary education level, we need to focus on the retention and quality. These are the two aspects we talk about. When you go to the higher education, the enrollment, retention, the quality, and research and development. So the four things. This is what I see if we want to transform the education. At the same time, should go beyond what we have in our kitty, that is within the government, but how do you open the extra resources from the outside? Then you can see the change. For that, the government has to go beyond what it has been doing right now and create a kind of a platform or framework or structure. So it helps the system. These are my final words. Thank you, Professor.
And I think, we have to, the bottom line is that we all should remember what Professor Khadria said. 6% is not without reason. I mean, there is a substantive basis for that. And, a democratic country must ask for it rather than depend on HEFA and so on and so forth. So all these conditions, the loans and allocations that come with conditionalities, they restrict any kind of a creative venture to in fact prosper, which in fact has been, I think, with much less fun with and private schools. We were public schooling that, was funded by government. All of us were product of that. We were not doing that bad as we are doing now, in spite of the fact that so-called funding in different areas have become better. Professor Saumen, yeah.
Yeah, just three statements. Number one, this is in connection with Professor Khadria said, we are doing much more than 6%. The reason is most of the things that we do in terms of economics, we call positive externalities, and they are not valued in the sphere of the market. And then
You're right.
if you bring in the importance of knowledge in spurring growth,
Absolutely.
we are doing much more than what is reflected in the.
No, they don't quantify, no, they just.
They are not quantifiable. And then our conduct, our behavior, and institutional functioning are absolutely crucial for the democratic functioning of the country.
Absolutely.
My next sentence, my next statement is, see, if I accept the NEP is the right way, I don't accept. NEP is the right way to usher in the transformation in the education sector, higher education sector, then the underlying condition is not getting fulfilled. The underlying condition is that you can foster competition to bring about the transformation only when we are well funded. We are not at all well funded. We don't have the basic facilities. I'm not going to turn around my laptop and show you what all we have in my room.
Yeah.
The third point is, we also, the teachers and the students, have to assume responsibility for this present state of affairs. I would say poor governance. We suffer from human capital constraint, resource constraint, we lack agency and leadership. I will not elaborate on this. I think I'm talking about 1,000-odd universities of the country and the colleges. I think we also have to look at ourselves, how we can do. Of course, we are suffocated, we feel constrained and all, but a much more is expected from us. If you go by the Web of Science, the number of publications, 1.5 million teachers, right? 100 teachers are producing only 15 to 16 papers as per Web of Science per year.
Yeah.
Is this our productivity? Terribly low. We are productive, but in terms of the journals, let us not talk about it. Thank you very much.
Well said.
Thank you, panelists. It was a great learning experience for all of us. Professor Dinesh Abrol has also joined us. So, Professor Abrol, would you like to say something?
Back to you.
Hi, Dinesh.
Yeah. So, Dinesh, would you like to say something?
A couple of things I just wanted to share. Firstly, with Binod. Number one, Binod, all of you have been excellent, and thank you. But I wanted to share something with Binod specifically, that this increase in IT and telecom funding is actually not really, meant for upgrading IT and ICT. In fact, we're closing MTNL. Since the assets of MTNL have to be, because it's a listed company, they have to be accounted for. Certain fund has been given, which BSNL will utilize to. So only this is number one. Number two, a lot of people went for VRS in BSNL and in MTNL. So they have to be paid for, etc. So a large part of this particular increase is explained, Binod, by that. Okay, number one. There are many more components. There are 5 more components. But let me not take time. So this is really not upgrading ICT and
as I said, it is unproductive.
It's not ICT and telecom upgradation. Number one. Number two, I would like to have a more detailed discussion with Nalin sometime. I have worked on R&Ds, S&T, and IPRs, etc. Let me say that see, Japan never internationalized its R&D. Much. Even in China, also it wasn't that way. Interested much. But as far as India is concerned, if anybody has been internationalizing R&D, it is the US. Because all the companies which are doing R&D and engineering services, a large number of them, you can look at the NSF latest data as far as it's concerned, and it accounts for 45% of our R&D manpower. Meaning people who work for the US companies, meaning that's an
I think the Zoom has gone.
Huge number.
Your
as far as-
connection, maybe my internet connection is
Yours,
unstable.
I think
We
Zoom
got it.
died.
Yeah, we got you back. Yeah, please go
Yeah,
ahead.
okay. So
Yeah.
what I was telling Nalin, that Japan is not the country which has been internationalizing R&D, but the US has been using us for R&D engineering services. Their companies are located in different parts of the country, Bangalore, Hyderabad, Noida, Gurugram, you name it. And 45% of our total manpower is working for the US companies in R&D and engineering services. So this is R&D FDI. In much of it is not even registered with DSIR, the Department of Scientific Industrial Research. So remember that also. The third point, as far as it's concerned, much of its IPR is owned by the headquarters.
Right.
It's not owned by Indian inventors are there, but the IP is owned by the headquarters as well. And I know Binod will understand the implications of many of the things which I'm saying. They're much larger. I call it recolonization of the country.
Absolutely.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
I don't call it really, I don't want to give further incentives to the FDI to come and colonize my talent, which is called the STEM talent, as far as rightly Binod pointed out. The next point, as far as what Sachi was mentioning, and let me call Sachi, I never called him Sachidanand Sinha ever in my life. As far as Sachi. He is Sachi.
It's alien to me also. Everybody calls me Sachi.
Private sector has been given huge amount of incentives to establish R&D, in-house R&D. Right from 93, 84 policy, which was the TPS, the technology policies, 2003, our Murli Manohar Joshi's policy, then 2013 policy, which never saw the light of the day appropriately, and I don't know to which minister I should attribute to. Similarly, the 2021 policy, all kinds of incentives have been there.
Right.
But the private sector did not make an investment. The last point which I want to ask is a question to Mona, because Professor Mona Khare knows that I want to know the UGC has attracted a cut, a substantive cut. What is this cut on account of? How it will impact on the sector as a whole and the UGC functioning in particular? Mona, you are you're muted.
Yeah.
So UGC, as you know, is the central agency, which is in a way providing all kinds of support to the majority colleges and universities in the country. And if there is a drastic cut to the order of 60%.
Mona, just for a small correction. Perhaps, the work that I did for UGC during the 11th and the 11th plan, what we found out that only 38% of all colleges and institutions received any kind of support from UGC. So the bulk of it remained absolutely outside the scope of the UGC. It doesn't mean that, they were not being funded by the government. I mean, that's
they are
the
being
state
funded
governments.
by they are being funded from the government only. But UGC's cut in the UGC's budget will have implications for various kinds of grants that are flowing down to the institutions for developmental purposes. So let us say grants which were going for construction of girls' hostels, or maybe construction of laboratories, many other new schemes which are launched by the governments. All these schemes are going to suffer, and the sufferers are going to be the smaller institutes and smaller universities in the underdeveloped or lesser developed states and regions of the country.
Absolutely.
So this is going to be a major concern, and that was also the reason why I highlighted the aspect that how the funds of the government are getting diverted towards the interest free loans under HEFA for the central universities and the institutions of national importance and the institutions which are already well funded by the government. So that limited fund of the government is also getting diverted to that type of institutions, rather than trying to make it available for the other category of institutions which are much in need for the funds. So this is what I think is
This is
serious,
absolutely
serious
critical
implication.
what Mona you have mentioned, and if I mention it in the context of ANRF, the Anusandhan National Research Foundation, its composition does not even have a representative from the state universities, and
That's true. That's true.
and it's a double whammy.
Yeah.
On the one hand, the way you have constituted ANRF, which was meant for supporting the state universities and colleges, you have not, you have chosen to divert funding away from state universities, and then you have also cut the UGC budget line, which is very important. I think we need to speak in one voice, because what Saumen was mentioning, the broad-based education, what Sachi is mentioning about differentiation and segmentation, which is happening, is going to be only further strengthened. And I think let me not elaborate more things on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Dinesh Abrol. I think, thank you, panelists. Thank you very much for staying with us for such a long period of time. I think it has been more than 2 hours, 2 hours, 20 minutes. And I think, I would hand over the program to the organizers themselves, And again, on behalf of IMPRI, because I'm part of IMPRI, I think, I must thank all of you. And we expect that, when very soon, we'll also try to organize some focused areas to discuss, flowing from whatever that you have contributed. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you
Thank
for.
you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Rushka, over to you.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all the panelists for such a riveting and detailed discussion. It was very interesting, if I may say so. And as we come to the end of today's discussion, I, Varushka, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, would like to propose a formal vote of thanks on behalf of IMPRI's Center for ICT for Development. I would like to thank you all for attending today's deliberation, a panel discussion on education, S&T, R&D, and the Union Budget 2024 to 25. As a part of IMPRI's 5th annual series on thematic deliberations and analysis of the Union Budget. We are grateful to our chair for this session, Professor Sachidanand Sinha ji, and our esteemed panelists, Dr. Y. Suresh Reddy ji, Professor Binod Khadria ji, Professor Mona Khare ji, Professor Nalin Bharti ji, Professor Saumen Chattopadhyay ji, and Professor Anita Rampal ji, for taking part in this discussion and enlightening us. We thank all of our participants today who have joined us and been incredibly patient with us. And we are grateful if you are watching us later on YouTube or listening to us on our various podcasts or reading our publications. We hope you continue to join us in the future for our IMPRI web policy talks and web policy learnings. With that, thank you all and wishing everyone a good day ahead. Once again, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Arjun.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.